Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 108 of Deering Live. Today it's just myself. My partner in crime, Jamie Laddie, is busy making sure our banjos get out to everybody um, who's ordered their next banjo. So you're just with me and our guest Ken Perlman today. So this will be fun. We're welcoming back Ken. Ken's been on the show once before, and Ken's a great renowned clawhammer banjo player, often known for his melodic style of clawhammer banjo playing. And Ken's written a great book, a new book on Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island uh, music in the clawhammer banjo style. And so today we're going to talk about that book, talk about that style of music, and have him play some tunes. So without further ado, let's bring Ken into the show.
Howdy, Dave.
Hey, good to see you, Ken.
Nice to
Welcome
see
back.
you. Great to be back.
Yeah, do you want to, before we get chatting, want to kick us off with a tune?
Sure. I'll play you a medley of tunes that are played on Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island in the form of what's called a Scottish set. So kind of March, Strathspey, Reel.
All right. Yeah, very good. Great,
Thank you.
great playing. Um,
Thank you.
so you call that the Scottish set. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a type of medley that was probably developed in Scotland in the early part of the late 19th, early 20th century. And the idea is uh, how do you um, organize fiddle tunes to perform them on the stage as opposed to for dancing?
Uh-huh.
And so there are various ways. One is to play them really, really fast, that's kind of the bluegrass way. Or another way is to play lots of and then you can make what's something developed like in the Baroque era, a suite of tunes.
Mm-hmm.
So in Scots English, the term set is used interchangeably in like the French suite. So it's really a suite of different kinds of tunes, different
Gotcha.
tempos. And the idea is to create kind of a musical tapestry.
Gotcha.
So the
Gotcha.
particular tunes was where the first tune was called Miss Maxwell. And the second was Miss Gordon, and the third was actually a modern tune by Jerry Holland called Robert Stubbard, and that was a reel. So you always finish with a good fast tune or reel.
You always kind of build it up. Do you always because there's the first? Is it generally three movements like that,
Well,
or
originally two or three, but some of the Cape Bretoners will have like, they'll string 10, 15, 20 tunes together.
okay? And does it generally get faster, start slow
Yes,
and get
yeah,
faster, or does it sometimes change the other way?
the idea you start slow and technically work faster and faster.
Okay, so it's really, really, you could bring if you were going to make your own Scottish set for
Yes,
your show, you would take choose, you know, three Scott tunes that are different and kind of work together and kind of have that build. Would you say is that how you'd kind of
yeah, they don't have to
describe
be
what it?
Scottish. I mean, you could make a set. You could take you could take a waltz,
Uh huh.
and then that would be a slow tune, and then you could play, Jerusalem Bridge after that.
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
it,
It
it
just, it doesn't have to be a Scottish tune to be a Scottish set. It could just be just
yeah, it's just this idea of a suite
gotcha,
of tunes in different styles and tempos.
gotcha.
Uh, Strung together, and as some of the fiddlers say, the idea is that the tunes kind of rhyme.
Uh huh. And so, what would be kind of the traditional instrumentation on like those those tunes that you played, or just generally overall in the region of Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island?
See what you're asking? What the instrumentation
The
was?
traditional instrumentation would
Yeah, I'm
be,
going to
yeah.
turn up the volume on you here. Yeah, well, things have changed quite a bit, but at the time when I was collecting, it was really just fiddle as the melody instrument and
Hmm.
whatever accompaniment was at hand. So on Cape Breton, at that time, it was almost always piano.
Okay.
And on Prince Edward Island, it was often piano, often and just as often guitar. And then when electronic keyboards started coming in the 90s, then that kind of drove out a lot of the guitar accompaniment.
Hmm.
And what the old timers said is that in the early part of the 20th century, the common accompanying instrument was a pump organ.
Okay. Cool.
And I've often and people have told me that this was also true in the South, that
All
that
right.
pump organ was often used for accompaniment.
Yeah. How would you describe the music of this region, and are there differences between the two regions, between Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island, and then also, well, what is it in the music that drew you to this music to really dive deep into it?
Ah, okay. Well, I'll start with the last question first.
Sure.
So I had been inspired by stories of like Alan Lomax and people who went
Hmm.
in, deep in the South and collected all this music, and I had the great experience of um, working with Alan Jabbour, who collected uh, lots of the old time fiddle tunes that founded the folk revival, and so and although I should say that I worked with Alan after I did my collecting project, but I was nevertheless inspired by that example, and I had the um, I had gone. This is a long story, but I had gone to a graduate school to get a PhD in ethnomusicology. I declared victory at the masters, but I had sent out some feelers. I wanted to go to study music in Scotland,
Hmm.
and I got back a letter. These were still letters at the time, a real letter from someone who said, "Well, uh, we can't give you any money, but we have a house on Prince Edward Island, and we have some really good fiddlers up here. Maybe you'd like to come and hear them. And if you come up, you can stay with us, and we'll feed you and everything."
Oh, cool.
So I needed a vacation, and I decided to go up there, and I met some of the fiddlers, and it was just wonderful music. And I thought, my God, no, there are all these fiddlers up here, and nobody knows about it. And there's
Yeah.
this incredibly strong musical tradition. So a few months later, I was in Washington D.C. and I went to the Library of Congress, and I found a very thin book that said Opportunities in Folklore.
Hmm.
And I was thumbing through it, and there was a page that said Call for Projects, and it was from an organization called Earthwatch,
Okay.
and which was actually based not far from me, as it turned out, in Boston. They were in Watertown, Massachusetts. And they were like Tom Sawyer Anonymous. People would sign up and pay money to work on a scientific project. And they were looking to move into the field of folklore. So I sent an idea, hey, why don't I go up and record all of these fiddle players? And I guess this was right what they were looking for, because within a week I had heard from them, and within a few months I was back on Prince Edward Island setting up this project for the
What
following
year was
summer.
this roughly?
Say,
What year was this roughly?
this was 1990,
Okay.
and so there were the project starts in 1991, and they're sending me these helpers, and they've financed all this tape and film and all this kind of old technology stuff.
Hmm.
And before long, we're out there and recording fiddler after fiddler after fiddler, like
Wow.
in the southern in in the old time music tradition. There's probably a couple of dozen fiddle players that have been collected, and all the music that people play are from those couple of dozen fiddlers, and they were like the very, very last of their kind.
Uh-huh.
But the full blown tradition on Prince Edward Island lasted 2 or 3 generations longer.
Okay.
So it was still completely full blown in 1970.
It was still vibrant and alive.
It was still completely alive,
Yeah.
and there were literally hundreds of fiddle players on Prince Edward Island who were full blown fiddlers, every bit as good as the dozen or so survivors uh, that the old time scene was based on. And it was
Uh-huh.
like, oh my, I was like a kid in a candy store. It was,
I bet.
it was like, every new fiddler we met was a treasure trove of repertoire and information. We also did oral histories as well. So um, I fell in love with the music, not only its rhythmic drive and the wonderful melodies,
Hmm.
and so many of them fit wonderfully on banjo. and but also with the people and the way their perspective and as they talked about the old days and the central role that music had in community life. Um,
What was that role? Was it? Tell us a little bit
well,
about that.
essentially, well, as one old timer put it, and this became the title of a book I wrote about the oral histories of the island. He said, in the old days, there were three important people in the village. Um, the, uh, the the minister or priest was first, then the school teacher, and then the fiddler,
Uh-huh.
because you couldn't have a wedding without the fiddler. And he pointed out how um, when the community needed to raise money for anything, they would have a fiddle dance, and the fiddlers would contribute their music for free, and people would pay so much per dance or whatever um, the way that the church or school was choosing to raise money. So, and the fiddlers are right in the middle, and um, the main form of recreation was, they called it the house party or
Mm-hmm.
fiddle dance, and then they had dances in the schoolhouses and various sorts of church picnics and all kinds of things like that. And you read about this almost the same kind of thing in accounts of old Appalachian culture.
Uh-huh.
But of course, it was long gone much earlier than it was long gone on Prince Edward Island. So,
Yeah.
and the connection between Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton is that they're neighbors. You can see from one to the other on a clear day.
Right.
And in the eastern part of Prince Edward Island, which is closest to Cape Breton, the music is very similar. And there's been tremendous influence from the Cape Breton recording industry and their very influential radio shows and
So
so on.
how would you describe the difference between the two, the Prince Edward Island versus Cape Breton? What are they different?
Uh,
What?
well, ethnically, they're almost identical. It's
Uh-huh.
Scottish, Irish, and Acadian French.
Right.
Although on Cape Breton, the identification with Scottish culture is much stronger. And in the 30s, on Cape Breton, they founded a very powerful recording industry, extremely influential industry with people like Angus Chisholm and so on, and this has persisted to the present day with great Winston Scotty Fitzgerald is another famous name that everyone should know, and the music coming out of the Cape Breton recording industry was every bit as powerful as the Irish fiddlers or the Scottish fiddlers earlier in the century. So, but Prince Edward Island never had. Well, it has a professional scene now, but when I happened upon it in 1990, there had never been a real professional fiddling scene there.
Uh-huh.
To the point where there were a couple of times um, people wanted to bring me to festivals in the United States if I could get um, a fiddler from Prince Edward Island to come with me, and I could never get find any of the old timers who wanted to leave the island to go play elsewhere. It just wasn't in um, it wasn't in their DNA to think of this as something that as a career opportunity.
Yeah.
So
Um. And so was there a tenor banjo ever being used there, like in Ireland, or is that just never kind of came over? That
well, the tenor banjo, as we know it in Irish music, is fairly new. It begins with
right, right,
with the Dubliners in the 1970s.
right.
So um, at the time that I did my project in the 90s, I heard tell of people playing the tenor banjo, with
Uh-huh.
the music, but there wasn't really much of a tradition of that. Now, since then, people have taken up all kinds of fretted instruments on
Sure.
both Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island. So,
Okay.
somebody who is familiar with the music today might say, "Oh well, wait a minute. What about Cody Chasen, who became very well known as a tenor banjo player?" But he was 3 years old when I met him.
How do you compare like the music from this region versus, you know, the homeland across the pond in Scotland and Ireland? Like, what is different about it after it crossed the Atlantic? What kind of influences got melded in? I mean, you have the French Acadian influence in there. I'm in Louisiana, so we have that, the Acadian influence here in the fiddle music.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you have Prince Edward Island. Before I go there, I should mention that Prince Edward Island has several regional styles as well. So in the eastern part, it's similar to Cape Breton, and in the western part, it's very Acadian
Uh-huh.
in influence. And in the middle, it's kind of a hodgepodge. But uh, I should also mention that there has been a very strong influence from American Southern American Appalachian music
Right,
because
right.
on a clear night you could pick up WWVA Wheeling, West Virginia,
Uh-huh.
in Prince Edward Island. It's only maybe about 1,000 miles as the crow flies,
Uh-huh.
and so a lot of fiddlers tell me they would be out in their cars in a deserted spot, you know,
Searching on the AM
yeah,
dial there.
right, looking for and so there's lots of stories about improvised radios and things like that. But you know, it's probably better to say that in terms of Ireland and Scotland, that you have essentially 200 years of evolution in separate directions, but then coming back together because of the influence of media.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the influence of the Scottish fiddler James Scott Skinner, who lived
Okay.
around the, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he lived probably, well, he died in 1926, but he was one of the first fiddle players to record, like first on Edison cylinder and then on
Mm-hmm.
78. And he was extremely influential with the first generation of Cape Breton fiddlers, and through them on into Prince Edward Island. So
And and if you heard somebody, if you heard some music today from Cape that you weren't familiar with, um, from the region, would you be able to tell that it's from there yourself because you're, knowing very clearly versus somebody that might be, Scotch Irish descent?
usually, I
Yeah.
mean, there's certainly a different rhythmic kick and a different style and different kinds
Okay.
of ornaments. But what's happened with the younger generations is that they're all coming back together.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's happening everywhere because of in all music because access to everything.
That's
So
right.
the
Yeah, and the
regional music
internet.
is kind of dissolving. Regional a lot of culture like that is kind of just
Yeah. Well, the
blending.
same with regional accents.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
exactly,
I live in Boston, and I barely hear a Boston accent anymore.
exactly.
Yeah.
The joke around Boston is Sully doesn't live in Boston anymore. Sully doesn't live in Boston anymore. It's a
Oh,
joke.
right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
um, well, we're about halfway. Well, before we go, actually, we have Banjo Ricardo's asking, what tuning are you playing in right now?
I was in the double C tuning, capoed
Okay.
up.
All right. So double D right now. Do you want to play another tune?
Sure. Banjo's had a lot of time to get out of tune.
All right, everybody. Well, Ken's tuning. If you have any questions for him, feel free to please put some questions in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, I'm going to play a little medley. I'll start with a march. It's called Joe McGinnis's March by Carl Mackenzie, who is a famous Cape Breton fiddler. And I learned it from Joe Cormier, who used to live in the Boston area. Lived in the Boston area a long time. And the second tune is a reel, a fast tune. It's called the Bray Reel, and it was collected by a wonderful fiddler, now departed. His name was Eddie Arsenault. From he was an Acadian fiddler.
Did the Acadians in that region use like Arsenault? That's be a common name down here in Louisiana. Is it spelled E-A-U-X? Is it the same spelling?
They usually spell it A-U-L-T.
Ah, okay, different.
But apparently there were only 30 names that of Acadian families that remained on Prince Edward Island after the British tried to expel the population.
Yeah.
So Arsenault is one of the most common names. And then there's Gallant, that's another popular one.
Okay.
And so this the second tune is called the Bray Reel.
All right, all right. What were those three tunes again?
Well, there are only two.
I mean, sorry, it's two tunes. Sorry, 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 sorry.
Joe McGinnis's March and the Bray Reel.
Nice, nice. Well, we have a good question from Michael Rich saying,
Yes.
saying, are the questions from this area written down, or do you just learn them from the locals?
Well, they are written down now. Because not only did I do this book for banjo, but I also did a book called The Fiddle Music of Prince Edward Island, which is in standard notation. But
So is that,
a lot of them actually, a lot of tunes from this area appear in old Scottish and Irish tune books, certainly. But most of the local players learn them by ear.
so did you the
How
book
did
that
I
you
learn
wrote
them?
in the book that you wrote in standard notation, is that kind of like, was it the Irish music, is it the McNeil's book, or
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. What are you asking?
do you know,
Is
you're
it like
familiar
the
with
McNeil?
The Irish fiddle tune book that's famous? Is it the McNeil's
Oh,
book?
O'Neill's Music of Ireland.
O'Neill's, yeah. And
You're
so
asking
is
if it's
yours as complete as something like that? Has it become kind of the Bible for like music of this area?
well, it could. I mean, it's not. O'Neill's had a lot more tunes.
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, so I think he had over 1,000 tunes, but I had over 400 in
Wow,
mine.
wow, that's
So,
great.
but it's a different era because now so many things are available on the internet.
Yeah, and um, and where can somebody get this book? Who is it published by? Is it still in print?
Oh well, it's the same publisher, Mel Bay, and it
Okay,
is in print.
cool. Well, everybody check it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,
It's called The Fiddle Music of Prince Edward Island.
okay, very good. So, how would you? We got we got a good question from Tony Thomas. Is there
Oh, I know Tony.
all
Hi,
right
Tony.
any pre-folk revival or post-penetration of five-string banjo? Do you know
I
where
think
he's
I know
going
what
with
he
that?
means.
Since you
Um,
know,
um, very, very little that I know about,
can
but
you
I
elaborate
have
a little bit?
I have heard tell of the odd people would say, "Oh yes, well, so many years ago, so and so used to play," but apparently it was not developed.
Okay, okay,
And whether it existed in the 19th century, when in the heyday of minstrel classic banjo, I
hmm
couldn't say.
right,
Yeah.
right. So let's get into taking like this music. Let's say somebody found got your book that you have written in standard notation, and they want to put it onto the five-string banjo in the clawhammer style. So why don't you walk us through how you go about arranging one of these tunes?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, that's
You know, start out with let's start out with what tuning would you use? Like what if you see a key, what tuning are you going to use for certain keys, and a certain is there a certain range in the melody that would change, what tuning you're using? If it was in C and playing out of G tuning or double C tuning or some example like that.
yeah. Well, it's a big question. So, well, why don't I just start with I'm in the G modal tuning now, tuned up,
Okay.
and um, it, the things available to you as a clawhammer player, you have drop and double thumbing,
Mm-hmm.
and you have hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides,
Mm-hmm.
and you have alternate string pull-offs. That's where you hit one string and pull off another one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big tool. And those are kind of the basic ones. There are some others as well. But let's say you had a passage that went something like this. So So you would start out with drop thumbing, and then the next that kind of lends itself to a pull off,
Mm-hmm.
and you have this, and you say, oh, well, that's actually a chord in this tuning, so I'll just put the chord down and I'll weave around it with drop thumbing. You put that
Uh-huh.
together, and the next part of it would go. So you start. Now this note you get from the fifth string,
Mm-hmm.
and another pull off, and then you weave again with the drop thumb.
Yeah.
So putting it all together. So that's the also part of the chord here.
So here, let's stop here. So, what key are you in? Of
Oh,
what two?
I'm
What's the
sorry.
tune in?
I'm still in the key of A modal.
The key, just the key. The key is A,
Key
right?
of A.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we're in the key of A.
But
So we're
but
gonna,
it's not a major scale. It's a modal scale.
but it's not A minor. So
Right. It's
right,
neither major nor
right,
minor.
right. But so you're saying you're saying A modal because in the melody there isn't a third, there isn't a C sharp essentially being played very often.
Well, you can have a modal tune that has a C sharp. This doesn't happen to have any third
Uh-huh.
at all.
Sure. And is that why you then
What?
with? Is that why you then went with the modal tuning, the sawmill tuning?
Um, yes, although also because the way the notes fell was more
Uh huh.
convenient.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And
And I picked this tune because I was already in sawmill tuning.
right, right. I just wanted to back up a
Yeah.
little bit so we
Yeah.
could.
No, no, it's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
So if getting because a big part of this arrangement on banjo is when you're playing a lot of open strings is the tuning is figuring out what tuning will work, and you can play play the same key in multiple tunings a lot of the time. So what are you kind of looking for there
Yeah.
to like
Well,
be like,
I tend to use really just three tunings.
uh-huh,
So I use the G modal and the G tuning and then double C.
right,
And occasionally I'll go outside of that, but usually I find that um, when I retune more aggressively, it makes some things easier but others harder.
yeah, yeah,
So, keeping three tunings in my head when I'm playing around the neck
right, right. I understand that.
is kind of enough. Um, but it is true, making a decision to play in the modal
Mm-hmm.
rather than regular G tuning. Sometimes I'll play. Sometimes I'll play in the modal tuning even though I have the major third, just because
Uh-huh.
it sounds better. Like here.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so it's really a function of letting the tune wash over you, and then um, certain turns of phrase. It's obvious how to make it fit on banjo, and other times um, there are kind of there are some counterintuitive things that go on in order to make it sound right.
uh-huh.
For example. There's a tune. In order to make this, I had to come up to the ninth fret here.
Mm-hmm. And why do you have to go to the ninth fret? Why did you decide to play that lower note that in pitch up at the ninth fret? It's because the next notes are surrounded.
It's because the way the melody goes in my head, it's da dee da 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 ba da da da.
Ah.
Because you want it to lead ahead to the next phrase, and therefore I wanted to get it with the thumb, rather than hammer onto it, in which case it would be weaker.
Yeah, that's good. It's kind of
So I make a lot of choices like that.
Yeah, these choices between when you're using a drop thumb somewhere versus a hammer on pull off sort of thing. It's something that you hear. Can you describe kind of how you make those choices? You just did a little bit. It was the thumb was more present. You want that sound, right?
Well, you hear how the melody goes. I remember when I started to arrange fiddle tunes for banjo, it would be like, well, I have all the notes, but it doesn't sound like the tune. Why doesn't it sound like the tune?
Right.
And I remember I had a long conversation with a fellow who was taking up the Ilian pipes, and he had gotten far enough along. He was teaching other people to play Irish music. His name was Phil Ox. Not Phil, Bill Ox. Phil Ox was the folk singer. And he would say, the important thing is phrasing. So there's like little imperceptible places where the melody ends and begins again.
Mm-hmm.
So in that particular tune, that's like an ending, and this is the beginning of the next part.
Yeah.
And this is partially a reflection of the fact that it's dance music. So in dance music, you're always leading from the upbeat to the downbeat, because that's what gives the signal to the dancers that that's where the next movement is starting.
Okay.
But individual tunes have their own character on top of that. So you would have to hear how the tune went when played by an expert fiddle player and say, well, how can I bring that out on the banjo?
Yeah.
And then you have your palette, you have your bag of tricks, and your knowledge of the fingerboard. And so how do I organize the notes on the fingerboard so that my bag of tricks to create the notes is brought into play in such a way that it sounds like the tune.
Yeah.
And is playable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the other thing.
And what about when in this this style of music, a lot of the time there's repeated notes.
Yes.
And that's hard to do on playing clawhammer banjo, especially if it's a lower note. Like if you're in open G, and you had a repeated open lower D note, you can't go to another string to get it. How do you do like a triplet repeated note, like a da da da?
Oh, you don't mean this? You don't mean repeated?
No, just if there was just low, you have the paper on. If you had the low E,
Are you talking about something like this? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, any repetitive note, that's where you can't just fret a, stretch and get the same pitch out of adjacent string.
Well, you can, if you're talking about a triplet, I've kind of developed these thing where I use my nail like a pick.
Okay. Yeah.
bell.
Yeah, you're kind of for a moment, a brief moment, you're kind of stopping the traditional clawhammer approach and using a little bit of a flat pick approach with your nail. Is that what you're
That's
kind of
right.
doing?
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
So that's one thing that
Yeah,
Um, but you can, if it's just a matter of hitting the same string twice, or
right,
sometimes you can get the same pitch on adjacent strings.
right. Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Alan Jones saying, "Does Ken play any Turlo O'Carolan tunes?" There are lots of in the O'Neill's book.
Ken does. um, it's Turlock, I think. I'll just do a little. This is O'Carolan's Concerto.
Yeah,
So, just for an example.
yeah. We've got another request while we're taking requests. We have
Okay.
Charles de Guide is asking, would Ken play the Hen's March to the Maiden or
Oh,
Dixon's
the
England?
midden.
Okay,
Um,
the Midden.
let's see if I
Yeah.
remember it. Sorry. Um, I used to know the Hens March to the Midden, but I'll do the
It's
Mason's
all right.
Apron instead. It's the same as a 18th century horn concerto.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about specifically about your new book, Cape Breton
Yeah,
and Prince Edward Island Fiddle Tunes for Clawhammer Banjo. There we go. You got it.
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A. We've got it. We've got it on daringbanjos.com as well. So
Very good.
definitely check it out. What kind of what? How long? When did you start working on this project? And what kind of drew you to put this in? These tunes in tablature form and make this book.
Well, if you want to know when I started working on the tunes in the book, it was like 30 years ago. But I decided I would create a book that was devoted to the music that I had put out in CD form for the most
Hmm.
part. So there were 4 CDs uh, devoted to Prince Edward Island and Cape Breton music played clawhammer style.
Hmm.
And first was called Devil in the Kitchen, and then we have Island Boy, and then Northern Banjo, and finally a few years ago I put out a recording called Frails and Frolics, and so. But in terms of, I guess I started working on the book a couple of years ago. First, I, wrote everything out in pencil, and then I had learned how to do tablature
Yep.
on on the computer. So I worked with a program called Finale, and I had learned to do that with my last book. It used to be that we sent off our uh, hand scratchings off somewhere, and they would do it for you. But now you have to do it yourself. And then I actually had to do my own book design this time. I learned how to use a program called InDesign and sort of created. I did everything in the book, so all they had to do was print it. But
Yes. So you basically these days you
yeah,
basically deliver a finished book to the publisher, and then they just print it out.
yeah, and actually, this picture on the cover is my photograph of
Okay. Right.
Prince Edward Island. So, and I kind of meant this book as a bit of a valedictory. It's like I had spent so many years working with the material, and I just wanted to share it with the banjo community,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you know, hopefully people will want to know how to do it, and it'll be right there. I think I write pretty good tablature, so if anyone is interested in learning this type of music, I think they'll be able to work from the book.
Yeah. It's a great. It's there isn't this out there, so it's a great void that you're filling. Um, and what else? Where can we? We're getting kind of to the top of the hour. We want to touch on what else you're working on, and where people can see you live. If there's anything coming up that you want to let people know about. Do you have any concerts or anything you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to talk about Midwest Banjo Camp,
All
which
right.
is I run 3 banjo camps. Midwest Banjo Camp is coming up very soon, June
That's out.
6th to
That's
9.
with elderly instruments.
Yeah, Stan Werbin and Lily Werbin, who own Elderly, are my partners
Okay.
in the event, and so we're now based at Manchester University in North Manchester, Indiana. We've been there. This is our
Okay.
second year there, and but we've this is like our 20th camp,
Yeah.
and so we have a lot of great old time and bluegrass instructors on tap, and it's just a very complete program of banjo immersion, and also we have fiddle, guitar, mandolin, and tenor banjo teachers as well.
Cool.
And,
And is
and
there still availability for
yes,
students
and
to sign
somebody's
up?
nice enough to put the website
Hmm. It's
on the board.
Jonathan in the
Thank you,
background. There you
thank,
go. Thanks,
thank you,
Jonathan.
Jonathan. And I should also mention that I also am the director of Swanee Banjo Camp. That's in
Okay.
North Florida in March. That's SwaneeBanjoCamp.com. And finally, American Banjo Camp in Florida in September. That we're on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington,
Okay.
and they're all similar formats. Classes and concerts and
Hmm.
staff-led jams and such. So
Sure.
yeah,
Sure. Very cool. Let's see. We have a couple more questions we want to get to. We kind of touched on
yeah.
this earlier, but Michael Rich said, "Are these tunes that you've been playing usually played with other musicians, or are they usually solo?"
Well, it's an interesting question. It's a very good question. The old tradition was one fiddler would play at a time. Like they would have a fiddlers gathering, and instead of everyone playing together,
Hmm.
one person would play, and everyone would listen, and then the next person would play. And certainly at the dances, it would be fiddler and accompaniment, or sometimes just the fiddler. But
Hmm.
nowadays, it's all become session music. So
Okay.
there's nothing wrong with playing it together with other people.
Very good. Um, let's see. Well, thanks, Ken, for coming on. This was fun. We're at the top of the hour. Is there anything else you want to talk about while you're here?
Um, not, no, I think we kind of covered it. I guess I guess do we have time for another tune?
Yeah, definitely. We'd love that. So,
Cool.
it's, thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned for more Daring Lives coming up this summer. And Ken, thanks again for being here. And everybody
My
go
great
check out
pleasure.
Ken's book, which is available at on our website, daringbanjos.com, under the education. So, um, all right, what tune are we going to play, or two?
Well, I'm going to start out with a tune called Stella's Trip to Kamloops. And this is written by Patricia Chafe, and she told me it's become a very famous tune in throughout the Maritimes, Canadian Maritimes. And she tells me that her aunt Stella she was a nun, and she was being sent out to British Columbia to work at a school. And the tune became famous, so she always tells her aunt, isn't it strange that so self-effacing a charitable lady has become famous, all because of a little tune. And the second tune is a strathspey called The Iron Man by Scott Skinner. And then I'm going to play John McNeil, or Big John McNeil, and which had to be taken up an octave to fit on the banjo. So
Yeah.
you'll see some of the choices that I made. So here we go.